Welcome back at the Windows 8.1 UX Design Jumpstart. My name is Martin Thierien. I'm a user experience evangelist with Microsoft in the Netherlands. With me is Chris.
Hi, I'm Chris Mayo. I'm also a user experience evangelist here at Microsoft.
You were a senior one at the previous session, right?
And then,
you were demoted. Okay. So welcome back. In this session, we'll talk about navigation. Of course, we talked about the controls and all the patterns that you can use. But navigation is very important for your app because people will do something with your app, right? And travel through the content of your app. Now, if you have a very simple, intuitive navigation in your app, it will actually help the user to get through your app and get through to the goals they set up for using your application. And if the navigation is good and it's really part of the app, it encourages people to investigate further into the app and search different parts of it. So really are immersed in what the app makes the app great.
Yeah, it's kind of like when you're traveling to a foreign city, right? The easier it is to get around that foreign city, the easier it is to enjoy the city and feel safe in the city. And it's the same thing with your app.
Yeah.
The easier it is to get to where you want to go and complete the scenarios, users are just going to be immersed in the application and not think about the app as much as the experience that they're having and why they love the app and why they enjoy it.
Exactly. So, that's a very good example. So let's look at a few of these patterns when we're using an app. For instance, when I go to the weather app here, we've seen it before in the previous sessions. So here we're on the weather app. In this case, I see the weather in my hometown. And well, it's a bit chilly, but it's better than here. And I see sun is coming up. But you see all the content is here. And I also see the forecast for the next few days. When I want to see more details of that day, I just tap on it and go there and see all the details of that day. So I get the highs and lows for that day or the details they already came up with in the forecast for that day. So it's a very easy navigation because I just tapped on that item. And when I scroll to the right, you see we already saw the hourly forecast, for instance. It's very easy to navigate there or go to the maps or see historical weather, etc. So it's very intuitive for the user to scroll through this information and get to the information he or she wants to get at and see that kind of things. Now, for instance, when I want to go to the maps and I just tap on the map, in this case I see the temperature in Europe progressing through the day. Or when I want to see precipitation, I can see that as well, what's happening over there. Or maybe I want to just change the region and go to, for instance, back here to the States. And we see what the temperature is there. So it's very easy to navigate between those different continents in this app and see the information. And by having the back button at the top left, it's very easy for me to get back to where I was and travel back through the app. So it makes it very easy to navigate here. Another example is when we go to the sports app, for instance. We already saw that as well. This is a different layout. You see scoreboard information here. You see top stories. You see an ad and headlines and favorite teams. And there's a chevron there after favorite team, so it indicates there's more information there. When I tap on it, I see other information here, and I can go to the details of, in this case, the Boston Red Sox and have some more details here, or go to the top stories there. So it's a very easy way for me to navigate through the application. And of course, we saw the navbar before that helps me get back to the home page, or maybe some other news, for a recap of NHL games. So it's very, very easy for me to navigate through all this data that is contained in this app, and it's all about sports. So that is a lot of information.
And those common patterns like the back, that tap for primary action for navigation, the back button, the nav bar, it's just something that like users will know how to navigate your app just from going into the store and navigating to find a few apps and stuff like that. They're going to know these patterns and figuring out how they uniquely apply to your app. It's going to give people that kind of consistent and familiar feeling while still making your app unique.
Yeah, it's very intuitive for people to just use it and use the app.
Yeah, that map having the back button on the nav bar, so the map was full screen, they could just kind of see all that data at once, but you just knew, just a reflex to grab from the top to get the nav bar to switch to the different maps or to go back.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a great example there of something kind of custom where they took a couple of different patterns and moved them together.
Yeah, exactly. So core to this is to think about an information architecture. Think about the structure that your app has, what the screens are and how the layout is and how the flow is in your application. So it's very important with an information architecture to think about the structuring of those screens, but also what we put on the screen. So what are the ways to navigate between those different types of information in your app and make it very consistent and very clear to the user. So for instance, one of the things that's mentioned here in this slide is also to have designators. So for instance, you'll have a label on top of a phone number. It's not just saying this is the mobile number or this is a phone number, but it says call this phone number. So when I tap that label, it just, you know what the action is. So then it's part of the complete UI, and it gives you a way to navigate through the application or interact with it. So it's a very powerful way to think about an information architecture. Now this is an example of an information architecture where we start with the start page in this case. Well, in every case you start with the start page, right? That's why it's the start page. And from there navigate to other parts of the app or other content areas. And if you have a picture like this, it's very clear for everyone, for the developers, for the designers, for the users. Yeah. You will not show that easy to the users, but maybe for the test team to know what the flow of the app is. And also it helps you to think about, is this the best way to lay out the data or to present data here? Or is it easier to connect screens together or navigate through those screens? Or do I need a nav bar? And what kind of information do I need there to help the user navigate through the content? So this is a very easy way to have an overview.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's one of those things that we were talking about earlier in Less is More, where there's that check and balance between the great at statement and scenarios and features. I mean, you should be able to go through the scenarios and the features from that great at statement and see how the user would flow and navigate through those, even though, right now, it's an information architecture, and those screens aren't necessarily laid out, or maybe they're more just representation or icons of what the screens are going to be. But as a check and balance, you and your team should be able to walk through and say, okay, if I'm, if I want to go to the top news stories of the day, I should be able to get there, and it goes from this screen to that screen and so on. Yeah. You should be able to see the navigation of the app and how they're going to complete those scenarios and features.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's what we saw, for instance, in demoing the sports app. We could go to different parts of the data, but it was very easy to come back to the home screen or to switch to another sport. Because if you have to travel all back the stack with all the screens that you see to get to another piece of data, it's not that easy for the user to get immersed into the content of your app. So this is a very good way to structure it and to have an overview of what's happening in your app. Now there are a number of navigation patterns you can use to support this in your app, and we'll talk about a number of them in this session. Now, there are standard navigation patterns we put in the platform. We use it in Windows. We've seen the things like panning or things like a back button. You see that in the Store app, for instance, in Windows itself. So there are various ways where we have the same kind of navigation patterns in the platform. When you apply those same patterns in your own app, it's very easy for the user to understand it and to use it in the app because they're already used to that kind of navigation. So it's not so it's not that you always should have this navigation bar, for instance. It's just thinking if it's necessary for your app, or maybe you have combinations of those. And we'll see some examples of that in this session as well.
Yeah, like any pattern, it's important to understand your scenarios, then understand the pattern and say, do they apply to me, or how do they apply to me, or Is that something I want to start with, and I'm gonna, I've got this scenario or that scenario, so I'm gonna, tune it slightly to make my app unique or to take care of this unique aspect of my app. But yeah, they're really powerful because users already know them, and you, by knowing them, can decide how and where to apply them.
Exactly, exactly. So, but the goal is still to make it very easy for the user to navigate through that to that app. Now, this is a pattern, and we already saw it briefly in Chris's session, the on-page pattern. So this means that the navigation is really taking place on the page itself. This is the pattern that can be described with these kind of elements on the screen. So, for instance, a header and a back button. The header indicates where you are in the app. So it shows not always the app's name, and it's not a breadcrumb, but it shows the title of where we are now. So the user knows what's the information about that I see here. You always see the context of that by seeing the header. And having the back button there, that's an easy way that we also know from browsers, etc. It's that it's easy to find your way back, do the steps back from where you came from. So that's one of the parts of an on-page pattern. Another part is having a section or a category label. So we saw that, for instance, in the weather app, where there was this maps section header, for instance, or with the sports app, where there was the top stories section, and you can tap on it and go to the top stories. So that's also part of the on-page pattern, a very easy way for users to see what they can do and navigate through the app. And of course, the content itself. When there's an article there and I tap on it, I'll just go to the details and see the full article or see the picture or whatever the content is. And that's very understandable for the user, and it's very easy for them to see and to use in the application. So those are the parts of an on-page pattern. Now this is an example that we already saw where this pattern is applied. So this is the Bing News app. You see number one, the header, Bing News is there, so we know this is about the news because this is the hub page. The section page, education, with the chevron there. So when the user taps there, it takes him to the education section. You see all the articles there. But an interesting one is also, that's pointed out with number 3, that at the bottom right, almost at the bottom right, there's a more education section there. Actually, it does the same as the header section because it takes me to all the other articles of this section. But it's a very nice way for users to get them navigated throughout the app. And maybe one is more used by one user and the other is more used by another user. So there are different ways to navigate through this app, and of course I can click on content to go there.
That's one of the cool things about that hub pattern is the fact that you want to show all the scenarios, you want to show all the data in your app, but you're not going to be able to show every single education news story, right? Just showing a few samplings of them and like the top news stories that kind of draws the user in if they're interested in education stories. Showing them that header and being able to navigate to a page, a list page that's just filtered to just the education news stories, kind of gives you that cool pattern of seeing what the app is about and what all the scenarios are on that hub page without it being totally humongous. And those section headers are a great way to help people find exactly what they're using as they're discovering the app.
Exactly.
What they're looking for when they discover the app.
Yeah. So the next pattern is the panning pattern. And the panning pattern, well, it's really like the hub, what we see in the hub page. Yeah. So when you have more content than fits on the screen, it's a way to provide this information to the user that it's still easy to navigate through that information. But it's a very convenient way for the user, and he doesn't have to go everywhere to see all the types of information. It's like the front page of your newspaper, right? Or a magazine. There are some links there are some pictures there's maybe some summary of that article, and it directs me to another page to see the complete article, or things like that. That's the same with this. So when we see this content area, there's a nice flow here in this example of the Bing Sports app. It shows a nice header picture, but also the other sections of this page. And the nice one thing is to have a content peak. When I switch to the sports app, when I go here and go back to the home screen, you see that there's a peak there of the scoreboard in this case. So there's hinting of there's more information, and this triggers users to go to the next part of it. And then there's still another part that's trimmed off. So it helps user to understand that he can go back to the left or to the right and to the left in this page. That's interesting, by the way, when you go to an Arabic language, it works the other way around, right? So we're talking all the time about left to right.
Right.
It also goes right to left, and that's also supported by the controls.
Yeah, just built into the platform, right?
Built in the platform, but that was a different story, right? Okay. So when we want to use panning, we want to provide all this information in a single view and just provide users the possibility to pan through that information. And you use it when the content is larger than the display. Now, by default, what we do in Windows is the direction is pan horizontally, right? In the long edge of the window.
Right.
And of course, when you're in portrait, then it's vertically, right?
Right, or a smaller window, right, if the height's greater than the width.
And that, by default, we've done that because the normal aspect ratio of the screen is 60:9 on most Windows devices. So it makes more sense to pan horizontally. But of course, you have to think about the design of your app and what makes sense for your app, how you implement panning. But there are some things you have to keep in mind when implementing that or designing that. So there are different types of panning. Of course, there's the single axis panning, so you just only do horizontal panning or only do vertical panning. You can have a rails type of panning, so you can pan in all directions, but it's limited to, well, where you start or where you move your finger. Oh, sorry. You see, now it happened already. So where you move your finger, where are you going? If you're going on the horizontal axis or on the vertical axis. And of course, then there's also the free form panning. And you see this, for instance, with a map, where you want to have a free form panning and move around in any direction. So those are different types of panning. When you want to combine these kinds of pannings, it's called chaining. So this is the support to have different elements on the screen. Maybe have a hub screen where you pan horizontally. And maybe there's also information that you want to pan vertically. And to show that, let me go back to the weather app. This is a good example because this is, well, horizontal panning. Right. But when I go to the hourly forecast, this is a longer list than fits on the screen. So there's vertically panning here. Now, and you see this, it makes it very easy because if this would have been a horizontal list as well, so what would happen if I would do this on the list? Would it scroll the list or scroll the complete page? So you have a problem there in competing gestures. The same you see here with the map. Now in this case on the hub page I cannot move the map. Right. If I move there, it just moves the complete page. When I tap on it, I see the map and now I can move the map. So this is about thinking about the gestures and the combination of those when you have them all together on a page. So what we don't want to do is have different kinds of controls that use panning and they pan in the same direction. Maybe we've all come along with these or seen these web pages where there's maybe a list in the article and you start scrolling down and then you're in the list and you're scrolling the list and you have to wait until you scroll the list and then it's scrolling the page again. It's very confusing for the user.
Or figure out where to touch outside the list.
Exactly.
It's like that quicksand feeling. It's like, how do I get out of this, right?
Yes, yeah. So by doing this, by having like different directions for the content and for the complete page, right, it makes it easier for the user and there are no competing gestures here for using touch in this case. Another thing that you can do with panning is use snap points. And this is really helping the user to get to a specific part of the content. And it's really helping out. So the best is to demonstrate it again. Well, let's go to the weather app again. You see when I touched it, touch is very sloppy, so I don't know where I end up when I just scroll. But you see it scrolls to maps, and when I go back, it scrolls to hourly forecast. It's aligned with the header in this case. So this is a very easy way for users to get through the content and just be helped, because I can do this. I can just put it somewhere in between. But it is just, there are small helpers there to get people to get to that content. So it helps user in this case. There are various types of snap points. So what we've seen now is proximity snap points. So it helps me to get in the neighborhood of that particular snap point. There are also mandatory snap points. And let me see if I can use this one and go here, pictures. Now in this case there are also snap points, but they're mandatory. I cannot put it in between two pictures because it will always snap to another picture. So this is just helping the user to get to that specific picture in this case, and don't end up somewhere in between, because that's not really useful.
Yeah, and if there's 20 pictures there and the user swiped like this to go through a lot of them, you'd like them to end on a picture, and maybe you don't want them to end up just like flying off into space where they're just flying through tons and tons of pictures.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. Yeah. So these are very good things to implement and to help users really find their way with navigating and panning through that page. The next pattern we'll have a look at is the navigation bar pattern. And we already saw some information that in the control section. The navigation bar is a standard control in the platform that you can use. And by default, we suggest that the navigation bar is the top app bar. And then there it contains the information. And we saw there are various ways to get to that navigation bar, just by swiping down from the top or swiping up from the bottom. It will also show the navigation bar, or right-clicking when you're using your mouse, or even with WinZ to go to the navigation bar. So there are quick access ways to that navigation bar. And in that way you have more space in your screen to focus on the content, but still offer a way to navigate through all the content in your app. And we've seen that before in the demos. Now this is the navigation bar anatomy. This is the default anatomy. So at the top you see that there are the major navigation parts. So you see your home, news, videos, etc. But with some of those items there's a button with a twisty. And when I open that, you get specific featured or highlights or specific parts of that navigation area. So it helps users again to navigate through that specific part of the content. Now this is an example with Internet Explorer 11, where the navigation bar is not at the top, but it's at the bottom, just above the bottom app bar. And this is because they find with navigating through web pages in my browser, it's easier when it's at the bottom when I use it in a tablet, because when I use my thumbs to navigate, they're already down there, so it's easy to go to another page. Instead, otherwise I had to go to the top page and really remove my hand from the device and go there.
And in this app, I mean, if you look at like a browser application, I mean, it's all navigation. Like all the commanding and stuff like that is navigation. So from an ergonomics and from a scenario standpoint, it makes sense to put that on the bottom, because that's it's not like I'm occasionally going to go from like the home page to like basketball or sports, like in a sports app. I'm going to be using those tabs all day, so it makes a lot of sense for that to be scenario specific.
Yeah, exactly. But still you see the same elements in the navigation bar. So you see the different pages that we have, the different tabs, but also some controls here to add a tab or to remove it and things like that. And we've seen Fresh Paint before. This is a different styling of the navigation bar. And you might want to ask yourself, is this really navigation? Because it looks more like actions. But in this case, it navigates me through using different brushes for painting, or different colors, or different styles, or different things I want to do with this picture. So they've chosen to put that in the navigation bar at the top. And there's a nice animation there, and it's completely different than what we've seen with the black and the the rectangular buttons there. So that's a way you can also implement your navigation bar, and that's all up to you and what fits to what your app is great at, right? So the next pattern is the flat pattern, and we've seen that already for instance, in the web browser, and this is what you use when the content is not really related, but it's on the same level, like it's all those documents, it's all those articles. And the focus is on fast switching between content. So you go from one document or article to the next one, for instance. Think of games and browsers or different documents I have. And you see in the images here that there are various ways to navigate through that content. So you see at the top images, just by panning or clicking on a button there, I can just move through that content in that same area. But by using the navigation bar, I can switch to the different documents and focus on that one. So with a flat pattern navigation anatomy, you can have direct links. So just by clicking on something and going to the next article or the next document, and having the navigation bar to switch and manage that content. So add another article or another document or remove it from that stack for the navigation. So it's very flat, and again is what we see with Internet Explorer, where you have the different tabs. Within the app you can navigate as well by clicking on the link, it goes to another page and etc. But by using the navigation bar I can go to the different tabs and those different browser sessions I have in my browser. So that's a very easy way to have a flat navigation pattern. Another pattern, the hierarchical pattern. And, well, in my opinion, there's something special about this, because we know hierarchical from apps and applications we made before. We're working with tree views, for instance, looking Windows, you see, with all your folders and stuff like that. We know with all kind of hierarchies. But it's always very hard when the hierarchy gets very big. It's very hard for users to navigate through that. And what we suggest with the hierarchical pattern is, well, limited to only a few levels. And what you see here, that, well, it's for large collections of related data, but it's a very easy way to navigate through that content. You start with a kind of hub view or an overview to start with, and to have already some content there, and then drill down to a section level, where you have more detail maybe for those items and see all the items, and maybe do some filtering or searching or sorting there. And then you end up on the detail level where the actual content is, so the article or etc. If you make this any deeper, it gets very complicated for the user to understand where he is and how he can get back to that other document or to that other level. So just limited to these three is very easy for the user to use it. So when we look at the anatomy for a hierarchical pattern, you see here the example of the hub page you already demonstrated. There's different parts of content already there. There is some links there to detailed content, like some articles, in this case of the Bing Sports app. But by using the header with the chevron, it takes me to the section level. So I can go to the section level, or I can go to the detail level by just tapping on an article. And on the second level we have the section page. So this is focused on just the section that, well, it represents, and show the data there that belongs to that section. And from there I go to the detail page. And of course I can have a way to navigate through those articles, like we've seen in the sports page. When I'm at the article, I can just flip through the articles on that level. So it's another way to navigate through that. So this is a very easy pattern to understand for the user, and they don't get lost in all those different complex hierarchies, but just in an easy way to use it. And when you use the hub page, it already expresses something to the user, right? It's the first look for the user, and when you open it, as we've seen in the sports app or in the finance app or in the news app or in the travel app, it already brings you some content that interests you, and it's alive with an image or maybe some other content that really supports your great ad statement. And then it's more appealing for the user to explore, because there might be content there that he already said, well, I'm interested in those teams, for instance, but now there's this other news item about another team. Maybe it's interesting to me, so I'll drill down there as well. So it's also to get people to really get themselves immersed into your app, into the content of your app, because that's what it's all about.
Yeah, I mean, whether it's like the front page of a magazine or a newspaper or a website or whatever, surfacing the scenarios and surfacing the data in your app or the content in your app that's going to really draw the user in and make them want to use that app day in, day out. I mean, that's the hub page is a great opportunity to do that, to really
exactly.
surface that greatness. Yeah.
And just to go back one slide, what we've seen with this hub page, of course, you think of the hub control that Chris showed in the control session, and that supports that you can have different sections in your hub page to show just those small parts of information there. But also when you go to the section page, and here you want to lay out like all that data, and you might think of laying that out in a grid or in a list or something like that. But of course you can use something like a hub control here as well if you have different kinds of information for that section, and just show it here. But it's just that it's clear that in this case we're at the top stories level. So it's clear for the user where they are and what kind of news articles are here in this case. And then at the detail level, well, you have all the freedom you want to use here to show the content and really bring the content alive, and make it work for the user, and still have a way to easily navigate through all that content or back up the stack. And of course, it's a very nice thing to also combine these kind of patterns, right? Combine maybe flat pattern with hierarchical, or have combinations of those. That makes it really powerful for your user to use your app and navigate through the content.
And that sports example is a great example we see in like Bing Sports and Bing News, where I can be navigating from like the hub page to just the education stories and then into an individual, story. And when I get to the end, rather than making me navigate back up to the top and then navigate back down to the next story, it's just on the end, and it's just and the next page flip brings up the next article, which kind of gives you kind of that flat as well as a hierarchical pattern between the two.
Exactly. So let me just show it. So here I'm on the detail level in the sports app, and when I just start browsing, there's also information here already what I can do with it and what the next article is. So I can tap on the article to go there, but I can also just page through it to get through all those articles. Yeah. Wow, there's a lot of content here.
Yeah.
So it really helps me to get through that content, and again, using the navigation bar, go up to the different parts of the application.
Yeah, so it's, combining the patterns and really about applying the patterns to your scenario is the key thing. It's not do this, do that. It's what's my scenario and how do people complete my scenario, and then leveraging the patterns, how they apply specifically to your app.
Exactly, yeah. So this is another pattern, the semantic zoom pattern. We already saw that also in the control section. Semantic zoom is actually an easy navigation through a large collection of data. When you're just working with a mouse and you have a list box where we all know the scroll bar. And there's a thumb there, and you can move it all to the bottom or to the top or somewhere in the middle and just try to find your content very fast. But when you're using touch, there's no scroll bar, there's no thumb. Yeah, well, you have your own thumb, but that's not very useful to find information. So this is a different way to navigate through that large collection of data, just by zooming out and have a semantic view of that same collection, so you can navigate through a specific part of the collection. And it's a very powerful tool, because you can define yourself what kind of information you want to show there to have a real understanding for the user, or what's important for the user. So in this example, this is the Great British Chefs app, and this is the start page. And let me try by just by showing it live. I think I have it here. Great British Chefs. So here's this app. It's a beautiful app. It shows me, well, all about food, right, and recipes. And I see there's seasonal and articles. And now I wanted to go back to seasonal. How do I do that? Just semantic zoom, tap on seasonal, and I'm back at that part of the information. So there's a lot of information here, and it's beautifully styled, but it really helps me to just navigate through that collection of data very fast. So it really helps out with that.
And users, just from using the start screen, you're going to start installing like hundreds of apps on your machine and breaking them off into groups and stuff like that. And you'll just get used to kind of expecting that if I pinch, I can pinch out and go right to the group that I want to and launch that game, you know, that kind of thing. So yeah, users will expect it. And if you build it in your app, it's like a great potential delighter moment, right?
Yeah, yeah. Actually, when you don't have it in your app and you have you're showing large collections of data, people really get disappointed because it's not there, and they can't figure out a way to navigate through that information. So really make sure that you think about these kind of patterns. So just to recap what we talked about in this session about navigation, think about how navigation helps your great ad statement. So how you can navigate through that content, how it's made easy for the user to navigate through the different sections or different parts of content. We've seen different type of patterns here, like the on-page pattern. Have things in the page visually, visually visible. That's always visible. So have it visible for the user that they know what they can do, right? Yeah. Maybe move to another article or move to that particular section or see more news and things like that. So that's a pattern you can use. We've seen the things about panning, how we can use the panning in the screen, but also think about competing gestures and make it easy for the user to not get lost in navigating through our app. Right. The flat pattern design, where we can have different types of content beside each other, like documents or pages, and just have a way to navigate through that. And we've seen the hierarchical pattern, where there's more data. It's a large collection where I can navigate through the data, but easily come back and not go into too deep that I got lost in the navigation. And of course, the navigation bar is a very powerful tool here to help the users in a very standard way throughout all the apps to navigate through all that data and understand what's happening there. Now, before we go to the lab instructions, there's a question. It's a long question in 3 parts. Okay. In the weather app, we navigate to forecast map that shows time-lapse map. Yes. There's a top app bar showing contextual controls and a general top bar showing navigation over entire app. Question, can we double the app bars in the same place? I understand what you're saying. So let me just show it. When I go here to the weather app and go to the maps, now you see here there's a kind of navigation bar there at the top. When I tap it again, it says temperature, precipitation, satellite, or cloud. So when I go to clouds, it shows a different view of this. But when I swipe up or down, there's the navigation bar. So I have 2 kinds of bars here. Now, by default, when I click on this, I tap on this, it's very easy for a user because he gets the ways to change the views. Getting the navigation bar is a separate action because you need to swipe down or swipe up or do a right click to get that information. And in this case, I think they've chosen a very good way to apply this. You just have to think about your user, and if it's maybe too complex and you want to use another way of presenting this to the user. In this case, I think it works. It works great.
Yeah, I think it's a great example of understanding the patterns and then applying them to a scenario where, like for that map control, they are mixing that hierarchical navigation with a flat pattern navigation, where, if you think about, me looking at those maps as a user, being able to switch between those, one, to have them full screen, so I can just look at the entire map and move around really easily. But just being able to switch between those different maps just with touching and selecting the next map It's easy to discover. I can see all my choices and so on. The other thing that I think that's really cool about it is otherwise, if I would have done that hierarchical again, I would have had to have listed all the maps on that top level page, and I would have to go back and forth and navigate back and forth. It's just kind of it feels cool for just a really easy and clean switching. The other thing that I like what you showed there is that I can consistently navigate either through that back button,
Yeah.
right, which is just another persistent pattern throughout the system, or I knew I could grab from the edge. So it was kind of like mixing the best of both worlds to really, for the designer to implement their scenario, right?
Exactly. So this shows that it's not about rules. It's about we're applying the tools and guidelines, and you think of the scenarios that are, or the implementations that are useful for your user to navigate through that data. Don't know if there are any other questions. Yeah, there are 2 more questions.
Awesome.
And the next question is, does Windows 8.1 have navigation for accessibility? So those are for those that are visually impaired. Yes, the WinRT has support for all of that. Mm-hmm. You have to do something in your code to make it sure that you can show information that like screen readers can use to show that to the user or tell it to the user. There's also support for having a higher contrast for users that are visually impaired. So there's all kind of things in the platform that can be used for that and can be used by tools for that. There's some guidance also on MSDN that shows you what to do. For instance, there are some attributes you have to add to a control so a screen reader knows what the control is and what he can read out to the user. So think of things like that as well if you want to implement that.
Yeah, design.windows.com, and then just look for the accessibility link, and it'll show you, like you said, what's in the platform, or I'm sorry, what are the features of Windows and how those are accessible via the platform, so you can build those features like high contrast or narrator. Yeah, just like the globalization stuff. It's in the platform, and it's in Windows. It's built into the controls, so you just have to kind of understand how it works and implement it for your scenario.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So you get it for free, but you have to do some work to make it really work in your app.
Yeah.
Another question is, can we mix and match flat and hierarchical navigation patterns? Can you suggest some common patterns to follow? So as we've seen before, there are really good ways to combine those different patterns and to make it really work for your user. Like we've seen in the weather app, for instance, there was a way to have different views, but also have the navigation bar to navigate through that kind of content. So it really, this shows which patterns are there, what they do, and what the meaning of it is, or the purpose of those patterns. It's up to you to think of the combination of those and how it makes the navigation best in your app for the user. So I think that's it. There are no more questions. Thanks for your time now. We'll have some meal. We'll back in 1 hour. So see you then.
Great. Thanks a lot.